says, no, give me 4. I'm like, oh, okay, she's serious, she's serious. Yeah. Welcome to Nashville Poetry Party presents Poetry on Demand, NPPPPOD. You know you like it. Give me some love. Come on. This is our first event of the sort of like, I don't know exactly. So I'm Andrew McFadyen-Ketchum, co-creator, co-host, co-writer, co-director, co-producer of the Nashville Poetry Party with lovely KC here, and the lovely Eric / Charles / disheveled. We like words here. We started Nashville Poetry Party this year, and as we were figuring out how to make it all work, we realized that we didn't want to do it all year long because it's really stressful and scary and terrifying, trust me. This is much more comfortable. And I said, well, what are we going to do in the off season? So we go from May, graduation, to October, Halloween. Well, what are we going to do from Halloween to graduation? I said we should do some sort of poetry series, and bookstores and poets at that moment, I'm not kidding, started emailing me and saying, can you have people at your party? I'm like, well, we ask people, but we don't like demand, we don't do that, we don't do it on demand. I went, poetry on demand, it's brilliant, okay? So that was how NPPPPOD was born. So again, one more round of applause for being here. Thank you for coming and being part of this. And so our first event tonight is for Annette. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Forevermore before we do anything else. So I am slowly but surely training. This is going to surprise you a little bit because it's weird to say, to be a holy man. Okay? If you know me, this is shocking. But I'm slowly but surely training to do this. And one thing I know how to do, have been trained to do, and thus do for various things, is to cleanse the space, right? And I was like, oh yeah, forevermore, before we get there, I will cleanse the space. And I was like, it doesn't need any cleansing, okay? This is the newest coffee shop in this neighborhood. It's one of the newest coffee shops in Nashville. It's one of the best coffee shops in town. And so we just want to give M, our barista, most dubious distinction, a round of applause. Please buy some coffee drinks. And Forevermore is open specifically for this. That is the only reason that they are open at all, is because we're here to do this with them today. So what we're going to do is Annette wanted me and Donovan to do a whole set of poetry readings, and me and Donovan were like, this is Annette's day, night, week, year. We can't, do too much of this. So we whittled it all the way down to me reading one poem, and then we will get to hear from Annette, and then Donovan and Annette are going to sit down and have a conversation, and you guys can chime in with your thoughts and questions and whatnot. At that time, we think it's going to take about 45 to 55 minutes. Does that sound good? Okay, all right, woo, okay. So for me, my third book came out a year and a half ago or so. And this is an unusual situation to be in where you're just reading one poem for, just because this nice person asked you to do it. So I thought, what do I want to do? I can read any poem I want to read. And so I wanted to take a moment to say that this year has been very difficult on both me and my wife here. It's just been one of those years, okay? And there have been times where we've really struggled and we weren't sure what we were doing and why we were doing it and how we were going to get through. But we managed to do what our vows said, regardless. And the vows are on our wall about half a mile that way. Yes, this is a wife-building session for me for a moment. It says, among many things, that we're going to support each other and make it work through the hard times, because, we knew they were going to come. So I'm going to read a poem that when I was first courting Karen, in a very similar way, I was like, now, I was working on this poem, and I'm going to read this, and then I'm going to introduce and give it to her. This is, where is it? Something more suitable. Please, my love, dig a hole in the earth and drop me inside and bury me over with earth and build a fire where I lie and wait for my return as red-winged blackbird, as white noise, as a drop of water on the tip of a leaf, and I will come to you each night, and I will sing to you each night, and no one but you will know that I am still here. Yeah. Half the audience is like, I don't really like how he has turned this into a rifling session. This is not fair. But, so Annette Sisson, got it, okay. For years I've been like, Sisson, this is more fun. Annette Sisson, I met you, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, at Major Jackson's party? Was that the first time you met? Okay. And then at Southern Festival of Books the next year, you had your book there. She said, hey, can we do, something for this book of mine that's coming out? I said, sure, let's figure this out. And that was sort of one of the reasons this was born, as I was saying earlier. But I didn't stop to look at, I got a book and I was looking through a book, but I didn't stop to look at the back of the book until earlier today. And I looked at the back of the book and I went, well, damn. So she's got boys from Eduardo C. Corral, Major Jackson, and Heidi Seaborn. If you don't know who these people are, you need to do some Googling. I mean, they're really fine poets. And so, I didn't actually read what they said. I'm just saying that the person on there, just that right there, says a lot about this book. The biggest, I think, the most important thing you can do as a poet is write poems. But the second one is write books of poems. And get those books out into the world. So congratulations to you, Annette. Annette Sisson is the author of Small Fish in High Branches, published by Glass. Is it Lyre or Lear? Lyre, okay. By Glass Lyre in 2022. Her poems have been published in Valparaiso Poetry Review, Birmingham Poetry Review, Rustin Moth. Yeah, I don't know this one. I didn't know it earlier. Lascaux Review, and elsewhere. I've seen it, I just don't know how to say it. She won the Poetry Writer Collective's 2019 Poetry Prize, which I was either the judge of or the year before. I didn't check before we got here, but I might have given you that. She is, you might have given it to yourself too. She is professor of English at Belmont University and lives in Nashville, Tennessee. Without further ado, Annette Sisson.
Look at all these people. He made it back with the books. And here's... Thank you, honey. Thank you, Andrew. Can you all hear me just fine? Yes. So, first, I want to thank poet and poetry advocate extraordinaire Andrew McFadyen-Ketchum and his new series, Poetry on Demand. And I'm honored to be the first featured in this reading series. And I'm really grateful to Andrew for making the arrangements so this book launch could happen, because it's not always easy to get your launch at Parnassus. Enough said. Second,
that might be where this conversation really started.
Yeah. Second, I want to thank Donovan McAfee, my friend, colleague, and fellow poet, for his presence and support tonight in the midst of always family responsibilities, a busy academic semester, and his recent trip to read poems in London. How cool is that? People paid to hear him read in London. So I'm looking forward to our interview later this evening. Third, I want to thank David Rebar, right here. Also my friend and former colleague before he retired from Belmont, where he was an art professor. David created the cover of Winter Sharp with Apples, which was a tremendous gift to me. Rather than choosing pre-existing art or photograph, as I had done with the last book at Chapbook, David said he would create the art, and he asked to read the book, which is such a gift in itself, which he did twice, making notes of everything he noticed. And based on those notes from the poems, and some conversations with me, this stunning cover image emerged. And this time I would say, you should judge a book by its cover. I spent some time worrying the poems would not live up to the cover. I really can't say, David, how deeply I was moved by this whole process and by the outcome, which is just stunning. As I've told some of you, that image, digital, has 27 layers. And I brought that enlarged image that now hangs in the hall of my house, so you all can examine it more closely. It's really impossible to express how much I appreciate that gift and this gorgeous work of art. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight, for coming out for more poetry, which is what I think is always needed, but perhaps especially now, after an election season that has left most of us exhausted and depleted. So may poetry bind our wounds and heal our souls. And finally, I want to thank my family for their support of my work. My husband, Jimmy, who just made a very long trip to go get the books we left at home. My daughter, Evan, and her partner, Nasir. I love you, and I appreciate you so much. So, on my poems. And I want to start by describing the book a little bit. So, there's actually a concept for this book, threaded through. Every poem does not follow this, but the idea behind this book is the grafting of plants and the cleft grafting of apple trees. The final poem in the book refers to Woolsthorpe Manor, which is where Isaac Newton lived, big farmhouse kind of thing. And in front, we were in England, and in front of the house is the apple tree, the storied, famous apple tree. It's gnarly, it's barely alive, but it's the tree. But that tree exists all over the world because it's been grafted and saved, and so it exists in many labs at many universities and so forth. And I had a poem that I had written a while back about cleft grafting. I had been reading about it, and it felt like a metaphor to me. I was going through a divorce at the time. And so I began to think about the grafting of plants and how you have to harm them or injure them. You have to do damage in order for them to thrive and heal and grow. And I really feel like that is a metaphor for our human experience. And so the book is in 3 sections. The first is called Unburying the Roots. The second is called Limbs Propagate in the Split. And the third is called Woodlanders, which I unashamedly borrowed from Thomas Hardy, because he always borrowed from people, and I love Thomas Hardy, and yes, he has a novel called Woodlanders. But it all has to do with trees, but each section sort of vacillates between damage and injury and growth and thriving. And there's kind of an upward trajectory in the book, I think. But in reality, I don't think there is always an upward trajectory, and I didn't want it to have a happy ending so much as to sort of reflect how we manage life. So that is the idea. And the last poem, the first poem begins with some musings about space, and it ends there as well. And so the last poem sort of suggests, I use nature imagery a lot, and it sort of suggests, we spend our lives among mountains and lakes and trees, but our lives are really also bound up in gravity and light and transcendent love. And so that's the idea of the book. And now I'll read poems. The first poem is called The Origin Story, and it is the proem, which is the first poem of the book that sort of stands alone and introduces the book. And the epigraph is from Margaret Atwood's Moral Disorder and Other Stories, and it says, in the end, we'll all become stories. I lie on a frayed quilt in a back acre, sweep my eyes across the dusky glass, jeweled studs of stars, nebulas in haze, metal stippling on a black satin canvas. My mind fastens on the belly of the silver river and reels, aches to touch life's nucleus. Galaxies of cells spiral, cobalt and amber whirl into green. To still the swirl, I focus on the febrile moon, sense its contours of despair, ecstasy, kernel of being, seed of death, twin chambers of a cracked walnut, a pair of fibrous lungs teetering on the edge of breath. So I'm going to read 2 or 3 short poems that are about childhood and damage. The first one is in 2 parts, but they're short. It's called Muscle Memory. 1. The late night train blares, wheels squeal on iron, like the season of my mother's first cancer. I was 8, studying the grim jaws of muted grown-ups. A young boy, you too worried, creasing baseball cards while your parents smoked and smoked, kitchen walls brown with nicotine. 2. We lug our stunted childhoods like rusted spikes, chains and malls. We recoil from flat cars, covered hoppers, runaways, fold into time, into pattern, rhythm, the howl of engines, clang of push and pull. There is no forswearing of air blast and signal, of memory, the wailing movement of diesel, piston, freight. The next poem is called First Language. A girl of 5, she dreams in tongues of bark and root. She mounts rungs nailed to a bird trunk, grasps the greening branch above her head, rests her small body up. Hands, elbows, knees, feet, she scrambles one fork to the next. Leaves imbibe light, obscure her parents' jagged mourning, brows drawn, checkbooks splayed open, the hiss and rasp of brittle tongues. Harbored among nest and twig, she idles, drifts, breathes in ripples of breeze, exhales sky. So, the next poem I want to read is called Blue Spruce, and it's when I was thinking about cleft grafting and going through a divorce. Blue Spruce. A somber autumn, season of drought and divorce. I read about cleft grafting, wonder how limbs propagate in the split. You arrive in your silver Chevy pickup, bring a Colorado spruce for my blue-eyed son, shoulder it inside, clip the low sprigs, shimmy trunk into metal, rotate, lock it down. I had shunned Christmas, the shuffling through trim, boxes of painted fragments, too sharp, too heavy to open. You splice strands, weave spangled light into branches, needles soft. The tree settles, stretches for tinsel and beads. Maybe a braided nest of eggs, sky blue, to roost when the elbows bend. And that is a love poem because sometimes the right person does come along.
Husband-wooing session as well.
It's a husband wooing, yes. Okay. Do any of you listen to public radio? Do you know what a driveway moment is? This poem is a driveway moment for me. It was actually a garage moment, but I couldn't get out of the car until I heard the whole story. And I think that's all I need to say. This poem, I had to fill in some gaps, but this is basically the story. It's called Under a White Moon. A daughter, now 82, spends a decade grubbing in dirt, unburying the transplanted roots of her life. She returns to this place, searches for roses. Grenada War Relocation Center, rocky, once covered with chain link, barbed wire. 7,000 Japanese Americans fenced away like nightshade. After Pearl Harbor, her mother took a cutting from her lost grandparents' rose bush, stashed it into a satchel under a slim volume of Basho, a hand mirror inlaid with mother of pearl, tokens to fuel dreams of pagodas, lotus blossoms, imperial as kabuki. At the camp, the mother waited for the moon's white shine, planted the chute while the guards slept, wormed her way out of the hammock to a patch of land with thicker soil, dug the hole with a borrowed spoon and pearl handle. 8 decades later, the daughter finds one pink bloom, a bud on a small bramble, petals drawn tight as a pill bug. She remembers the dusty corners of the wire enclosure, sees her mother's hands grafting roses, hears her whisper to the stem's nodes. It's the roots that save, push them deep. All right, and now for some poems about my mother. Oops, wrong page. I have 3. My mother died in 2018, and I think I'll never stop writing about her. That's the conclusion I've now drawn. I kept thinking, okay, I've done that now. After a long Indiana winter in 1964, my father lost his job in a season of snowstorms, unable to handle the roads, even with tire chains on the old yellow Buick. I was 5. When winter thawed, Mom and I planted a garden behind our rental, salvia, marigolds, morning glories for a trellis, bachelor buttons. As we dug the bed, cleaned out grass and weeds thick against cement blocks, she instructed me about seeds, how temperature and rain, soil and air work together to crack them open. She culled the dead matter, remnants of another tenant, blossoms and stems spent into dried straw. Among the withered plants, a small bird, a goldfinch, still, tangled in spurge and bindweed. Mom pulled him free, sent me inside to fetch toilet paper and the empty kitchen matchbox we'd discarded that morning. She spread the tissue across my fleshy palm, placed the bird on top. We inspected the body, wings, markings. She helped me roll the tissue around him several turns, lay him in the box which she slid open. A gold corpse, a winding sheet, the matchbox she'd reached for every day to light the gas stove. We buried him in the garden, leveled the ground, lined out furrows for our seeds, pushed them into the soft earth's crust. All summer we weeded and watered. Morning glories curled, purple blooms, eyes shut to noon. The narrow plot clotted with color, salvia red as blood, flocks of marigolds. This is a very different side of our relationship. Late. My mother presses the vein on the top of her hand, asks me if I regret the abortion. Her voice lingers, eyes fixed on the kitchen window. I stir the soup again, replace the stainless lid, gnaw the membrane inside my lip. Many years ago, I heard her breath clutch, silence on the phone line as she pictured me splayed on a bare table, the trickle of blood. For 30 years, she hadn't asked, nursed this ghost, banded it in certainty. Mom, I was never pregnant. My period finally came. She releases the fusty air from her chest, lays down the wraith of raw belief she's carried like a blade. Okay, this is a poem in 3 parts, also about my mother. It's called Her Offering. 1. One by one, before they ripened in my front yard, the skins split, coral flesh of cantaloupe gaping. I suspected raccoon, possum, deer, the heat. Certainly not the eastern box turtle plodding through shadowed vines, snug under its stenciled carapace, saffron-eyed among chiseled lines, spilled seeds, the raw viscera of loss. 2. My mother compiled a list of marriage partners for my father, for after she passed. My parents recited the litany of candidates over and over, revising, parsing pros and cons until my mother paused, too frail to carry on. 3. Here in this garden, honeyed with carnage, I see at last my mother's kindness, how she offered herself, the fruit of her overripe body, untangled the withering vine of her illness, fashioned him a sequel, a shell like a shield etched with widows' names. Perhaps she hoped one would slip the cover off, crack open the whole of him, gather the scattered kernels, salvage a cantaloupe roughly inscribed before summer's end. It seems like a funny poem, but it isn't. Or maybe it is also funny. Okay, now we're going to go to England for the last 3 poems. I've spent a lot of time in England, and I've never regretted it. That's all I can say. It's been one of the great gifts of teaching at Belmont that I've gotten to go over there so much. This one is called Spring Forward. And I wrote it about an anniversary trip that we took while we were there that did not necessarily go smoothly, right? But Spring Forward. 28 wedded years, pearls slipped from silk thread, knotted in lace. Tonight, we set our clocks forward, and time confounds us again. Maybe that's why neither of us can sleep in this Victorian hotel, floors sinking, mattress slanted, the baby next door waking to cry. The years wick away while we lie here, alert, sifting. I dredge memory, its dark rents, cannot recall the name of today's tour guide, nor the saint in the cathedral's transept, nor even your mother's presence at our ceremony, though I know she was there. Before our next pearl is tied, she'll wither with luck and ease for death and troubled by pain. Now in midnight's cleft, I'd like to cradle the wailing baby in my arms, cup it to my shoulder, hold it there until the hours of fleeting sleep dissolve into morning, until I retrieve what's lost, measure the heft of each pearl in my palm, until time swivels and spring's strand of light is long. Now, as you know, we all wrote COVID poems, and most of them sucked. I wrote many, but this one I think works because I wasn't trying to write a COVID poem, you know. This poem is called Statistics, and I think it speaks for itself. The wall along the south bank bursts with shining red hearts all the way from Westminster Bridge to Lambeth. Why Valentine's in July, we wonder. Push on to the Florence Nightingale Museum. Inside the low-slung building, Nightingale's fastidious records, her mastery of statistics, line graphs of injuries, dysentery, cholera, typhus, scatter plots wielded like weapons to tout antiseptics, make others see what she saw, bacteria and virus rupturing soldiers' lives like artillery. Beside the ticket desk, we exit into afternoon drizzle, threading through streets, markets, the gardens of St. Thomas Hospital, past smokers in wheelchairs, revolving fountain, dahlia, delphinium. We hurry for a close-up of the wall. There, across from Parliament, there in Big Ben's sightlines, it curves out of view, every inch laden with hearts, except for a bronze plaque, the National COVID Memorial Wall, 228,000 small markers in concrete. Down the sidewalk, a young woman extends her hand above her head, scrawls with a black Sharpie, endless epitaphs, names, and the mourners still here on this path, facing the structure, bearing paint, brushes, shaping hearts like upside-down tears joined at the base, some looped with string, clustered like balloons, bright sacks of breath knotted tight, as if love could loosen its clutch. This vibrant sorrow could fade into London's heavy air. The last poem I'll read is called Woolsthorpe Manor. So, I told you a little bit about Woolsthorpe Manor. Dr. Murray was there. Hey, Doug. It was a memorable day. All kinds of things. There were weather events, grapple, and all kinds of things happened. But there was the tree, and then inside, on the walls of the house, you could see Newton working out his theories, because, there weren't any whiteboards or blackboards. Some of it was faded away, and some of it was quite distinct. It was a fascinating place. And also, on some of the walls were lists of his sins and people he was really angry at. He was also a judge, and he was really quite heartless as a judge. And he had a lot of Calvinistic stuff going on. I don't know, sin and all that stuff. He was better in science, I think. But anyway, Woolsthorpe Manor. Here, while the cattle wander off, Newton reads in the orchard, studies apple descent. What draws the fruit keeps the moon from crashing into the pasture. Inside his cottage, prisms perch on dressers, tables, plot waves of sun rays, optics, fragments of white light, scrawls on the walls now faint. Newton's physics germinating, sprouting into tree. The theory is almost right. His numbers derived from Euclid's limb. But classical gardens cannot plot a universe, trace curves in space, the swoop of time that slides from its axis. From Newton's tree, Einstein cleaves a scion that twists into sun's eye, blind as bombs, bends into Big Bang. And new graphs from Einstein's branch divide into strings, quarks, loops of gravity. What propagates next? Obsolescence? Inertia? Love? What to do but claw across the ice, debate how much a vessel can bear, if rock and cloud will pull us under into winter's frigid rush, into drifts, sleep, the tang of desire of apple.
Annette.
Thank you.
Woo! My goodness.
Thank you, Don.
Oh, it's wonderful to read. Oh, I'm not muted. I mean, I am muted. We have that booming voice. It's the voice that just won't quit even when you want it to.
Can y'all hear Don okay?
You hear me all right?
Yeah, okay.
I'll tell you, I look out across here, I'm sure some of you know Annette as your professor, some as your colleague in English, some other parts of the university, and some just from the Nashville literary community. And I just want to say publicly that Annette is one of those colleagues that makes me feel terrible about myself. She's just the whole package, you know? You have such a reputation for being an excellent professor who cares about your students, who demands good work, and yet cares deeply for them. You are a citizen of our university in a way that has been a gift to be your colleague, and you're a literary citizen of Nashville. And so I'm honored to be here with you to celebrate your second collection coming out. Let's just clap one more time. Let's keep clapping for Annette. I don't do the writing group thing. A lot of poets write with other poets. I don't do that often, but somehow or other, we ended up in a writing group together for like a year or two.
Yeah.
When you were just sort of starting to get
I was trying to figure things out.
Yeah, and having Annette read your work is a real honor as well, because you've got such a great eye for, it comes from the imagery of your work and also when you read other people's work. One thing I love to ask poets is, and maybe it's because most of the poets I know have such questionable moral character.
Bingo.
But I sort of think of poets as like Marvel villains. And you want to know what's their origin story. What is it? What wounded you so much that you landed in poetry? Maybe not wounded you, but what is it that made you fascinated with this particular art form in writing?
Yeah, so my mother's mother was not someone who was my grandmother. But she had probably a very difficult and hard life, but she was also a person who made people within the family have fights with each other. She was manipulative. But she played the violin, and she never called me by my name. If I was around her, she said, "Hey, you." But she wouldn't call me by my name. She called my cousin Wanda by her name. But it was because she didn't like my father. And she didn't want my mother to have married him. But I started playing piano when I was 5. And so music is a really important thing to me, but I like I like thinking about music as I write, more than I like sitting at the keyboard now. But because I played piano, and she had this notion that maybe we were something alike, and she gave my mother James Whitcomb Riley and Robert Louis Stevenson books when I was young, and Mom read them to me every night, and I had many of those poems memorized, when I was, I don't know, 4 or 5, something like that.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's where it all started. And then when I was in the 3rd grade, we did this whole poetry project, and I'm not kidding, I have a PhD in Victorian literature. My favorite project I ever did was that 3rd grade poetry project. It was the best, and I was so sad when it was over. So that's kind of how it all got started.
Yeah.
But, there's a lot of woundedness in my family in various ways, and so, that dark thing that
Yes.
sometimes compels us to write is certainly there. And it's not just my grandmother, but, anyway.
And maybe you can, I remember bits of it just from talking to you over the years, but if I'm not mistaken, you sort of pursued poetry earlier on, and then the academic thing sort of took over?
Yeah.
How
So-
did that sort of happen?
So I always write poetry, and all the way through high school I rhymed, always. And when I got to college, I was a literature major and a creative writing minor. And I finally sort of made the breakthrough in this independent study I did over the summer with a professor, and realized, okay, so I can write free verse. And I really felt like I made progress. And then I took a year and a half off before I went to graduate school, and I thought, well, my father said things like, you'll never amount to anything as a writer to me, and he didn't think I should go to graduate school at all. And so I thought, okay, somehow I thought, being a literature professor was more stable and promising, and maybe it was. And so I decided I would go either in Renaissance or Victorian. I ended up Victorian. But I did submit my poems to a creative writing workshop when I first got there, because I kind of still hadn't given up on that. Well, the MFA program at Indiana University, where I was thriving, and it was relatively new, but now they were getting people applying who already had books. And so the guy who ran the workshop rejected me, and he wrote me the kindest note and said, I hope you'll try again. We have this influx of students, two have a book, and I hope you'll try again. And how did Annette hear that? You are not good enough. And I never tried again, ever. But I hung out with all these creative writing people. My first husband was a poet. I worked on the Indiana Review. I just hung out with all those people. I did all the creative writing stuff I could do without being a creative writing student. And then when I got to Nashville, I found that every time I actually had free time, I was writing a poem. And so after, several decades, like 30 years, I finally said to my husband, I have to do something about this.
And that was about 7 years ago?
6 years ago, 2000. It was late 2017, but I didn't even take myself seriously until 2018, and then I started trying.
Well, and this goes back to the part of Annette that really annoys me.
I'm also annoyed.
Her excellence.
Yeah.
The fact that you start writing again in 2018, and here in 2024, she has 2 collections published. And in the poetry world, that's a little, what one might call enviable.
I've been really fortunate.
Yes.
But I will say, I sent things out for a whole year and got not even an encouraging remark.
Yeah.
And that tested my mettle. That was, I knew from hanging out with creative writing people that I had to be tough, but that was hard, and tears were shed sometimes.
What do you think it was in you at that point in your life that just said, I'm doing this. I'm gonna push through. If earlier on a not quite kind remark might put you off, what was it that made you say, they're gonna tell me no, they're gonna tell me no, they're gonna tell me no, but I believe in my work enough to keep at it?
Well, I would say there are 3 things. One is 3 decades of repressing something, but it's still there. Should tell you something. The other thing is my mother started taking herself seriously as a painter when she was in her 50s. And I wrote my dissertation on Georgia Eliot, who started writing novels in her 40s, which was very old for a Victorian woman. And she has a quote from her work it's never too late to be what you might have been. And I had that as a tagline on my emails because when I was directing a graduate program in 2010 to 15, we get all these people who wanted to be English majors but did something else. And so I had that on my email to encourage them. And then one day, I never took it off. And one day I looked at it and I was like, well, why do you not think this applies to you?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then I thought about my mom and I thought about George Eliot. You know, I wrote my dissertation about her. So I should be listening to these women. So.
Well, and I mean, I know you, I'm friends with you, but we're not in each other's houses. You know what I mean? We're not all up in each other's business, so to speak.
No.
But you know, this is my 14th year going. So I knew you for about 8 years before this sort of creative renaissance. And even from the distance at which I live, it's been beautiful to see that come alive in you because you feel different. Does that make sense?
I feel different.
Yeah. What has that been like to feel different and live into that?
Well, I'm not living my life nearly as much as I was by the word ought, what I ought to be doing. You know, I raised 3 kids, don't regret that a bit. But I did so many things at Belmont, and I did mostly love them. Okay, some of them were hard, and maybe I didn't always love them. But, you know, I mean, unlike some people despise anything that's administrative, and I didn't.
Yeah.
But I still felt like I was, in the long run, I was just denying something that was essentially me, too. You know, I was always doing the thing that seemed more practical or, you know, careerist or whatever, and I was just putting all this on hold, and so it feels different. And there's still, I mean, I'm still a person. I'm still directing a graduate program again because there's somebody to do it right now. But
Because Gary's lazy?
because he was finished. He fulfilled his term, but I feel like, yeah, it's deeply satisfying, and there's a lot less driven by ought, by duty or responsibility. You know, I'm an oldest child, and it shows in every way. So
You're breaking free of that.
yeah.
Well, I've been trying to read more kind of echo poetry, nature writing, and I read this quote. This is from a great collection that a poet I know called Kathleen Jamie put together of essays, and it's called Antlers on Water, and it's Antlers of Water. It's Scottish nature writing and poetry.
Oh.
And in her intro, she says it doesn't take much to be an echo writer or a nature poet. It begins when you pay attention to the world and to language and strive to bring the two together. And when I read your work, I feel like so much of it is grounded in the natural world, and I get a sense of of Indiana in your work. I get a sense of Nashville in your work, in terms of the flora and the fauna and of England. Like, you bring us into these different spaces. So I'd be curious, what is it about the natural world that draws you into that as a particularly fruitful space for your writing?
It's kind of hard to explain because people read my work and they think, oh, she is a nature person. She's an outdoorsy girl. She hikes every weekend. She lives at REI. This is not who I am. This is not who I am. But so Mary Oliver says you should look at nature and just observe it. Just observe it. Pay attention to nature for its own sake. And I sometimes feel guilty because I come to realize I don't do that. Nature is always a metaphor for human experience with me. And I try to pay careful attention, as Mary would have me do. And I do spend a lot of time researching things about nature and looking out the window of my office. And, you know, I feel like I'm storing up images, you know, when I go for walks or I'm in the car and I'm trying to store things up. But it just speaks to me. It just speaks to me of the human experience, and I really believe we are not separate. We are nature.
Yeah.
So it works for me. But
well, I think you think about classic literature and religious literature in agrarian cultures. Their understanding of themselves and their bodies is much more connected to the natural world.
Yes.
And when we live in more built environments, we become separate from that.
Yes.
And so I love poetry that reminds us how connected we are, even if we've forgotten. And I think it's, when we think of ourselves in metaphors that are technological, that's problematic for our health. But when you look at growth and you look at grafting and woundedness and regeneration, these metaphors that you weave throughout this collection, I find that to be a very healing sort of proposition.
Good.
Yeah.
Donovan, can we take some questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
We've got like,
I forgot people were still here. I was just talking to them.
we got like 5 or 10 minutes, then
You
we
got
want to
5
sell some
more
books
minutes?
and whatnot.
Yeah.
So,
What questions do y'all have? As you've heard, Annette's reading and articulation of things.
maybe I was wrong. Maybe we don't have any questions. We could just do one more question and we can.
I love it. I love it.
Okay, all right. Sorry, I interrupted.
No. I realized at a certain point, I lost track of time. Gosh, there's so many gorgeous lines. The first language, that's one of my, I wrote down these poems, I'm like, I hope she reads the ones out, and that was one of the ones. She dreams in tongues of bark and root. God almighty. When I read these poems, so when I read your work, there are 2 poets that come to mind, and maybe I'm off here, but like, there's a Ted Kooser kind of thing with the natural world, and I feel a little bit of Yosef Koulignac's work in you too. Not obviously about the racial dynamics, but like his collection, Magic City, where you get the childhood of Bogalusa, Louisiana, and the natural world, and a lot of his poetry engages with the natural world in Louisiana, in Australia, and Vietnam, and I love the way that you place us in these environments in different ways. But I'm also curious, one of the things I love about poems of childhood is that you get the poet talking about the child itself, barks and roots, the language, and you get the added layer of the poet looking back on the self. And so I'd be curious, how do you feel about that child that you're writing back about, whether it's the child climbing the tree, assessing the world, or the young woman feeling these tensions with her mother, coming to appreciate her points, upset with her points. When you look back on the young you that you seem to be exploring in some of these poems, what is that like for you as a writer, as a poet? What does the poems do for you?
Yeah. I think they let me process my life. And it's really I love just sitting there and thinking about it and remembering and then grabbing onto something that I think I can hold on to. I'm 66 and I feel like life is like rushing by and I want to slow it down. And this is a way of slowing it down and grabbing onto moments and seeing myself. How I feel about that child, I don't know. She had a bumpy ride, but she also was really lucky. I guess that's what I would say about that. I miss my mom. I still talk to my mom. But it wasn't always easy. My friends were like, oh, you're the perfect mother and your kids are so close. And, but that's never the whole story. That's how it looks. And it was like that to some extent. I miss her terribly. But, I think I've come to realize that I don't need to get morbid on you all, but I have never been comfortable with the idea of dying. It's not like I'm unaware of it. It's not, but I just have thought, I want to do that with grace. And I don't know how. And I think this is helping me make friends with death. Sometimes people will say, your poems are depressing. I'm sorry, yeah, they might be, but they're the stuff of life. And, so I think that's part of what's going on for me too, is reassessing the life and the whole curve of that life and trying to see it more clearly and hang on to it and then become more comfortable with how the arc is a circle and that's a good thing, So
Well, thank you so much, Annette.
Yeah.
Gift to hear you read and get to
Thank
talk to
you.
you.
She's gonna be selling and signing books right there. There are books over there, books over there. You're also welcome to hang out for a little bit, because it's gonna take a minute to do that.
And there's
Get a
food.
coffee drink. And there's food.
Food.
Yes, food provided by Poet.
But you should also patronize the coffee store that made this place available to us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming this evening.
You're still here.
Okay, I thought myself.